Flying drones has become a huge passion for me over the past few years. I first saw them just as a tool for filmmaking and photography, but I found that they are also a lot of fun to fly and they've given me many extraordinary travel experiences. Not always for good though. So far I'd only used normal DJI drones, but I'd already done a lot of proximity flying to enhance my shots with them. So it was pretty clear to me that the next step would be to get into FPV drones. There was one problem though, getting into FPV looked quite difficult, at least until DJI released their ready-to-fly FPV drone.
What's that?
My second drone?
How much?
Let's not talk about that. The DJI FPV drone was a lot of fun to fly, and the different flying modes allowed me to begin flying immediately while I still trained flying fully manual in the simulator. I was able to get many FPV style shots pretty much instantly by only using the motion controller. Flying through tight spaces, for example, was extremely easy. But let's be honest, if you want to fly FPV, you want the full package, including all the flips, the rolls and other tricks that you can do with it. So after about 10 hours in the simulator, I felt confident enough to give acro mode or fully manual the first try. Now, it actually took much longer than I expected until I crashed it the first time, but when it happened I noticed directly that this drone is a lot more likely to break during crashes as other FPV drones, plus it's more expensive and takes much longer to repair. After crashing it twice in one day, the DJI was already broken and I had to send it in for repair, which left me without a drone for 2 more weeks. It was a really harrowing time and the withdrawal symptoms were pretty severe, as you can imagine. I tried therapy, did some meditation, and I even considered changing career. It got better, but I definitely knew that I couldn't go through this crushing heartbreak again. So I had to make the painful decision to sell the DJI FPV drone and get a safe one again instead, the DJI Air2S. Okay, it wasn't that bad, but I also want to say here that there's definitely a place for the DJI FPV drone if you just want to get some FPV-like shots easily, or if you want to have a more immersive flying experience, or you simply want to fly further away without much risk, because the goggles really help with that. But if you actually want to learn FPV, it's not the right way to go in my opinion. So despite of selling the DJI FPV drone and enjoying the Air2S, I felt that I had tasted blood with my first FPV experience and I wanted more. Luckily, I was recommended an FPV online shop here in Thailand, which does all the hard work for its customers. Perfect for a Dumbo like me. So I contacted them to suggest an FPV drone and they built and sent me a whole ready-to-fly package.
New drone again?
It's another FPV drone, but much better than the one that I had before. And there it was, the Protek 35 from iFlight. It looked a bit like a toy, but I would soon learn it's an absolute beast. I got the HD version to use with DJI goggles for better video quality, but instead of going with the DJI FPV remote controller, I opted for the TBS Tango 2, which is very travel friendly and has a super strong signal. Now, this package costs around the same as the DJI FPV drone, but that's mainly because of the DJI goggles and the controller. You can save a lot of money by getting the analog version together with cheaper analog goggles and a cheaper remote. In this case, you're looking at around $600 to get started, including batteries. Now, the main reason why I chose the Protek 35 drone specifically is that it's overall a very safe drone, because it comes with these propeller guards here which can actually avoid crashes, and they did, and they also make it a lot safer to fly around people, so I felt a lot more confident in the beginning compared to flying an open propeller drone. It's a pretty small drone, but it has so much power. Usually FPV drones like this can't fly as acrobatically as normal FPV drones. But with the Protek 35, iFlight has changed that, which makes it a super capable yet safe drone. The only downside is that you usually have to connect it to your goggles and controller by yourself, which is not difficult, but as I ordered it from the Thai FPV online shop, the drone came perfectly set up, so I only had to charge the batteries and I was ready for my first flight. Oh no, actually not. At first I had to spend some time in a simulator again again to be sure my first flight wouldn't end in a disaster, because, well, it's difficult. But this time I used a simulator called Lift-Off, which you can use with most FPV remote controllers. And it's actually a good tip for beginners. Before you even get your actual FPV drone, better get your remote controller first, because then you can already train in the simulator and you can also save a bit more money while doing so for the actual drone. I was really excited to fly the drone for real, so after only a few sessions in the simulator, I went out for a quick flight. I flew carefully, so it didn't end up in a mess. The days and weeks after that were also amazing.
Oh, I made it!
Because the Protek 35 drone handles crashes really well, I felt a lot more confident flying it and I took more risks.
It felt so scary, but now it's like super fun.
Every time I went out, I had something in mind that I wanted to try. Sometimes it was as simple as flying through tight spaces, but I also wanted to learn some more complicated tricks. One of them was the power loop. This is a pretty scary one, because for about half the time you have close to no control over the drone.
Now, the reason for that is simply that when the drone is in a flipped over state during the power loop, you have to bring the throttle completely down, because otherwise it would push itself into the ground. And that means that you have to gain enough height and enough speed backwards before you're in this position, because otherwise the drone will either crash or, if you're lucky, you can bail out.
I started by watching a few YouTube tutorials on how to power loop, and before I tried it out with my FPV drone, I went back into the simulator doing one power loop after another. But enough preparation. After 2 hours of intense training, it was time to try it in the real world.
That will be a tough one, my first power loop. Yeah! I made it! Oh yeah, that was awesome! So good.
Predictably, right after my first power loop, my first big crash happened. The drone crashed on the other side of a creek during a test flight, and while I tried to get it back, it dropped slightly into the water. But that was no issue for the drone, as it turned out.
And I must say that the durability of the Protek 35 really surprised me. I crashed it around 30 times until now, and some crashes were actually quite bad. One time it was actually so hard that one of these prop guards here got banded, so the propeller couldn't spin anymore. And I was able to just bend it back and it worked perfectly. So really durable drone.
Most impressive was this crash though. The drone fell right into a creek and was underwater deep sea diving for about 20 minutes. I had no hope that it would still work after I got it out of there.
GoPro is still working. Hey GoPro!
But I dried it with a hairdryer, and to my surprise it worked perfectly fine. Hairdryers can really cure anything.
It work? The drone still works?
Of course, some crashes caused minor damage, sometimes I had to tighten some screws again at the front for example, but these repairs are so straightforward that anyone could do it. This is the Protek 35's big advantage over the DJI FPV drone. Most crashes don't do anything to normal FPV drones, and even if you get some damage, it's usually a quick and cheap fix.
Okay, that all sounds pretty good, but of course there are also a few downsides to traditional FPV drones, and one of them is that there's usually no GPS, return to home, or any other automatic functions. So if you lose connection, the drone won't come back to you or hover in place like DJI drones do. Instead it will likely crash. And I actually lost connection once in the mountains on my goggles, so you can see that here. I'm flying through the road gap there in between the trees, and right in the gap I lost signal. That was super scary. I thought I would lose my drone now, but I knew from my previous drone experience that losing signal from the goggles usually means that I still have signal on the controller. So I held my sticks in place to keep flying forward for a second to get away from the trees, and then I pressed throttle up to increase the altitude quickly and eventually get signal back. Suddenly I got video signal again and I was able to fly the drone back to me. So lucky. Now there are also GPS modules available for FPV drones, but the return to home function with that seems to be quite experimental, so I decided to go without GPS instead of paying extra for it.
The other downside is the battery management. FPV drones use LiPo batteries, which need to be treated well, because otherwise they won't last that long and they can even catch fire and burn your house down. So when you get into FPV, definitely watch some YouTube tutorials on how to charge them or ask your drone shop for advice, but don't just wing it.
So that's where I always store my FPV batteries, outside of the house here where it can't burn anything. I also charge them here on my balcony because there's also nothing that can burn around the batteries. And then I also got these liposafe bags here, which is good for traveling so that not my motorbike suddenly burns or even airplane or something like that.
So the downsides of getting into FPV aren't actually that bad, and I had a lot of fun with the Protek 35. The immersive experience in the air combined with the constant adrenaline rushes you get make every trip more adventurous. This is how I love to travel. But I also wanted to know how the beefier FPV drones of the professionals feel, so I ordered the new iFlight Nazgul Evoque.
The other one again.
I got 30% discount.
The Nazgul Evoque is the perfect upgrade from the Protek 35.
That looks awesome.
It's also a bind and fly drone, so I had to pair it with my DJI goggles and controller myself. I had some issues doing that, but that was mostly because I'm too stupid to calibrate the controller. The differences to the Protek 35 are that the Nazgul comes without prop guards, it has 5-inch instead of 3.5-inch propellers, and it's built even more solid with a 6mm carbon frame. So it's even faster, more agile and more robust. Additionally, I went for the 6S version, what gives me even more power and longer flight times.
So we went on a hike today. I brought the Nazgul Evoque with me. I've been here before with the Protek 35, but I think I can do better, especially with a drone that rips like that.
Flying FPV during the trip was a great experience, and I feel like I've mastered a new skill. Not that I would call myself a pro FPV pilot now, but I'm at least on a level where I can use FPV drones to make my videos a lot more interesting. More importantly though, I had a lot of fun over the year with it. So I can only recommend getting into FPV, and with bind and fly drones from iFlight and other companies, it's also easier and safer than ever before to get unhealthily obsessed with it.